the quiet proprietor, the wife called just the nanny who owned the mansion. What happens when the person you promise to love, honor, and cherish dismisses you in front of the world as nothing more than the hired help? For Letitia Solano, the breaking point came with 6 soul-crushing words. Oh, her. She's just the nanny. In the opulent ballroom of a mansion she called home, her husband, Richard, swept her aside with a laugh. But what he didn't know, and what his glittering guests could never imagine, was that the real power was not in his bank account or his booming voice. It was hidden in a secret folder, on a name signed on a piece of paper that was about to make his entire world collapse. This is not just a story of revenge. It is a story of reclamation. Part 1. The Tenant and the Secret Annex. The air at the Hawthorne estate always felt borrowed. It was a magnificent mansion, a sprawling neo-colonial pile nestled in the green hills of upstate New York, with stone walls that held the chill of a century and windows that stared outward like the eyes of a sleeping beast. To the outside world, this was the home of Richard Rivers and Letitia Solano, a testament to his astonishing success in the world of finance. But for Letitia, it was a gilded cage, and the bars were forged with her husband's expectations. Letitia moved through the grand hall, her footsteps silent on the Persian rugs. She was not born to this life. She was the daughter of a librarian from a quiet town near Denver, a woman who found more solace in the silent aisles of a library than in the resonant grandeur of a ballroom. She had met Richard a decade ago, a whirlwind romance where she, a scholarship student at Columbia University, was swept away by the charismatic, ambitious MBA student who promised her the world. He had delivered in his own way. He had given her a life of unimaginable luxury. 2 beautiful children, Lila, 10, and Leo, 6, and a last name that opened doors. But in the process, he had worn down the woman she used to be, replacing her with a polished, quiet accessory. Tonight was the annual Rivers Foundation Gala, Richard's social pinnacle. It was not in reality a charity event. It was a power play, a night where Richard flaunted his success in front of rivals, allies, and sycophants. For Letitia, it was an ordeal. For weeks, she had been the invisible engine of the event. She coordinated with the caterers, the florists, the orchestra. She selected the champagne vintage and approved the 7-course menu. She did everything from a small, sunlit study Ricardo condescendingly called her hobby room, while he took the credit. "Letitia, darling!" Richard's voice boomed from the top of the grand staircase. He was already in his tuxedo, a masterpiece of tailoring that did little to soften the sharp, predatory lines of his ambition. "Is everything in order? The chase party will be here any minute. I want tonight to be impeccable." "Everything is ready, Richard," she replied, her voice calm and even, a skill she had perfected over years of navigating his moods. "The staff are briefed, the tables are set, and the champagne is cold." He descended the stairs, looking not at her, but at the cavernous hall, his eyes scanning for imperfections. "Good. Remember to steer clear of Victoria Chase. That woman is a shark, and I don't want you saying anything, naive." Letitia's jaw tightened. Naive. It was his favorite word for her, a verbal pat on the head to remind her of her place. "I know how to behave, Richard." He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her simple but elegant navy dress. He frowned slightly. "Is that what you're wearing? It's a bit subdued, isn't it?" "It's a classic, Richard. Subdued is elegant. Subdued is forgettable," he countered, before focusing on a new wave of anxiety. "Is the driveway clear? The valet service needs to be spot on. I don't want a bottleneck." He left without another word, leaving her standing in the center of the hall. He considered the success his. He considered her just another element, another piece of decor he had acquired. She smoothed her dress and took a long, steady breath. Lila and Leo were with their favorite nanny, Maria, tucked away in the family wing of the mansion, shielded from this parade of vanity. That was Letitia's only non-negotiable condition for the night. Her children would not be props in their father's theater. The guests began to arrive, a river of silk, diamonds, and artificial laughter. They were the titans of industry, the socialite divas, the people whose names were whispered with reverence in the financial pages. Letitia played her role with practiced grace. She smiled. She shook hands. She inquired about children she had never met and summer homes she had never seen. She was the perfect hostess, a ghost moving through the crowd, making sure everyone's glass was full and everyone's ego was flattered. Richard was in his element. He stood near the massive stone fireplace, Scotch glass in hand, holding court, his voice, rich and confident, cutting through the murmur. Letitia watched him from across the room. He was handsome. She couldn't deny it. But the charm that had once captivated her now seemed reptilian, a skin he shed when they were alone. Later in the evening, as the orchestra played a soft melody, Letitia was checking on the dessert in the kitchens when she caught a fragment of conversation in the adjoining hallway. It was Victoria Chase, a woman sculpted from ambition and disdain, her voice a poisonous whisper. "I can't believe Richard Rivers is still with her. She's so bland. She has the air of a country mouse who stumbled into the palace." Another woman whose name Letitia couldn't place laughed. "I heard she was a nobody before him. He plucked her from obscurity. Honestly, she looks more like the children's nanny than the lady of the house." The words were like tiny fragments of ice in her veins. She had heard whispers like this before, but they had never been so close, so clear. She leaned against the cool kitchen wall, the clatter of pots and pans a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had given up her dreams, her archival science career, her own identity to support his. And for what? To be the subject of cruel jokes? She composed herself and walked back into the ballroom, her head held high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She spotted Richard in a tight circle with a group of prospective investors, including the notorious billionaire Marcus Thorne. Thorne was known to be an old-fashioned man who valued family and stability. Letitia knew Richard was desperate to close a deal with him. She approached the group, intending to offer them a fresh round of drinks, to play the part of the attentive wife. As she drew near, she saw Victoria Chase glide over to the group, champagne glass in hand. "Richard, darling," Victoria purred, placing a hand on his arm that lingered a moment too long. "Everything is simply divine. You are truly the king of this castle." She then directed her sharp eyes to Letitia, who was now standing at the edge of the circle. Victoria's smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. She looked Letitia up and down, then turned back to Marcus Thorne. "And you've met everyone, haven't you?" Marcus Thorne, a burly man with kind eyes, offered Letitia a polite smile. "I had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Solano. Yes, a lovely woman." Richard, basking into the praise and anxious to maintain his alpha status in the group, made a fatal dismissive gesture in Letitia's direction. He chuckled, a sound meant to be charmingly self-deprecating, but that landed with the force of a slap. "Oh, Letitia," he said, his eyes never meeting hers. The entire circle turned to look at her. The music seemed to fade. The world narrowed to that single horrible moment. "Don't mind her. She's a worker bee. Keeps the whole operation running smoothly. Think of her as the executive nanny." He then made it worse. As a new couple approached, the woman asked, pointing to Letitia, "Is that your wife, Richard? I don't think we've been introduced." Richard, high on his own importance and the adulation of his guests, delivered the final, devastating blow. He waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, her," he said with a laugh loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's just the nanny." An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the group. Victoria Chase's eyes gleamed with triumph. Marcus Thorne's polite smile faltered, replaced by a look of deep discomfort. For a few seconds, there was a terrible, resounding silence, where the only sound was the fizz of champagne bubbles. Letitia stood paralyzed. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a slip. It was a public execution of her identity. Every sacrifice she had made, every lonely night she had endured, every condescending comment she had swallowed, it all converged into a single, unbearable pressure point. He had not only insulted her, he had erased her. In his world, in this house, she was nothing more than the help. Something inside her, something long dormant, snapped. The pain, white-hot and stinging, was there. But beneath it, a different sensation began to surface. It was a cold, clear, unyielding rage. It was not the explosive, fiery anger of a tantrum, but the deep, tectonic fury of a woman who had finally been pushed too far. She did not run out. She did not cry. She held Richard's gaze for a brief, searing moment, her eyes conveying a message he was too arrogant to read. Then she gave the group a smile so serene, so utterly detached, it was more chilling than any scream. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice incredibly steady. "I must go check on the children." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. She wasn't just leaving the room. She was leaving the life Richard had built for her. As she ascended the grand staircase, leaving the party and her husband behind, she wasn't thinking about the catering, or the guests, or the whispers. She was thinking of a locked drawer in her hobby room. She was thinking of a thick manila folder, and she was thinking of the name of the man who had truly seen her worth. Arthur Hawthorne, the original owner of the mansion, the man who had left her a secret weapon, a final, beautiful checkmate in a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. The deed to the Hawthorne estate was in her name, and Richard was about to discover what it truly meant to be a guest in her home. Part 2. The codicil of Arthur Hawthorne. Letitia did not go to the children's wing. Lila and Leo were safe, with Maria, lost in the world of bedtime stories and dreams. Instead, she went to her small office, the room Richard had so graciously allowed her to have. She closed the heavy oak door, the click of the lock sounding like the first turn of a key in the ignition of her new life. The faint sounds of the orchestra below were a world away. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with adrenaline. Just the nanny. The words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the room. For years, she had accepted his narrative, that he had saved her, that her life was a gift from him. She had believed the price of this gilded cage was her voice. Tonight, she realized the price was her soul, and she was no longer willing to pay it. She knelt down and pulled open the bottom drawer of her antique writing desk, a piece she had purchased herself with a small inheritance from her grandmother, one of the few things in the house that was truly hers. Tucked beneath a stack of old art history textbooks was the manila folder. It was worn at the edges, the paper soft with age. Her name, Letitia Vance, her maiden name, was written on the tab in faint, trembling script. Not her own. Inside was a collection of documents, but she bypassed all of them. Her fingers sought the primary one. It was a thick, stiff, important-looking parchment, the official deed to the property known as the Hawthorne Estate, including the main house and the surrounding 250 acres. And there, under the section marked Owner, was her name printed in black ink, undeniable, Letitia Maria Vance. Beneath the deed was a sealed envelope, addressed to her in the same elegant, trembling handwriting. She had read it only once the day it was delivered, and had found the contents so overwhelming, so bittersweet, that she had sealed it away, almost afraid of its implications. Tonight, she needed to read it again. She needed to remember. Her mind flashed back 12 years to a time before Richard, a time when she was just Letitia Vance, a brilliant but struggling graduate student. To pay for her studies at Columbia, she had taken a job as a companion and archivist for a reclusive, fabulously wealthy elderly man, Arthur Hawthorne. Arthur was the last of his lineage, a childless widower, living out his final years in the very mansion she now called home. He was grumpy, brilliant, and profoundly lonely. The world saw him as an eccentric hermit, but Letitia saw a man with a deep love for history, art, and quiet integrity. He hired her to organize his massive personal library, a task that was more a ploy for company than a genuine need for an archivist. They spent hundreds of hours together in the dusty, sun-drenched library of the Hawthorne estate. He told her stories of his life, of the changing world, of the paintings that adorned his walls. He taught her about finance, not the predatory kind Richard practiced, but the patient, value-based investing of a bygone era. He, more than anyone, saw the sharp, inquiring mind beneath her quiet exterior. "The world is full of noisy men, Letitia," he had told her one day, his voice a hoarse whisper, looking out over his estate. "Men who mistake volume for value. They build empires on sand and call them fortresses. The trick is to have your foundation on solid rock and build it so quietly they don't even know it's there until the storm hits." When Arthur's health began to fail, Letitia became his primary caregiver, a role she took on with genuine affection. It was during this time that she met Richard, who was a junior associate at the firm, managing a small part of Arthur's vast estate. Richard was charming, attentive, and deeply impressed by her proximity to such wealth. Looking back, Letitia could see the early red flags. His questions were always about Arthur's net worth, about the value of the art, about the estate. At the time, blinded by what she thought was love, she saw it as ambition. Arthur saw it for what it was. "He looks at this house the way a wolf looks at a sheep," Arthur had warned her, his frail hand covering hers. "Be careful, dear. Men like that don't acquire things. They consume them, and they consume people, too." She had defended Richard, assuring Arthur he was different. Arthur had simply patted her hand and said, "I hope you're right. But hope is not a strategy. One must always have a fortress." Arthur Hawthorne passed away peacefully a few months later. In his will, he left a generous but not extravagant sum to Letitia, enough to finish her studies and live comfortably. The bulk of his fortune went to establishing a new wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The house and its contents were to be sold, and the proceeds would fund the endowment. What Letitia didn't know, what no one knew except Arthur's most trusted attorney, a quiet man named Samuel Durrance, was that there was a secret annex to the will, a codicil. Letitia opened the letter in her office. Arthur's words seemed to lift from the page, his voice ringing in her memory. "My dearest Letitia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are likely feeling a little lost. I write to you because you were the only person in my final years who saw a man, not a bank vault. You shared your intellect, your kindness, and your time, none of which had a price, and all of which was invaluable. I have left you a sum in my public will, but I have also made a private provision. I worry about you, dear. You have a good heart, which in this world can be a liability. That young man, Richard Rivers, has the scent of ambition, and it is a scent that often sours into greed. He wants this house, I know. He talks about it as if it were his birthright, and perhaps one day he will have the means to acquire it. That is why I have made a rather unusual arrangement. I have instructed my counsel, Mr. Durrance, to use a separate private trust to anonymously purchase the Hawthorne estate when it comes up for market. He is then directed to sign the deed over to you, Letitia Vance. The house is yours. It was always meant for someone who appreciated its soul, not its square footage. Let Richard believe he's the king. Let him build his empire of sand within these stone walls. This house, this land, this rock-solid foundation, it is your fortress. If ever the day comes that you need to remind him and the world who you are, this deed will be your voice. Do not use it out of spite, but out of necessity. Use it to protect yourself and your future. Use it to be free. You are not naive, Letitia. You are kind. Do not let anyone convince you they are the same. Yours in memory, Arthur Hawthorne. Tears streamed down Letitia's face, not of sadness, but of deep, heartbreaking gratitude. Arthur had seen everything. He had predicted the storm. He hadn't just given her a house. He had given her a lifeline, a secret power held in reserve for the exact moment she needed it most. For 10 years, she had lived in this house as a guest, deferring to Richard on every decision, when he proudly announced 6 years ago that he had finally raised the capital through leveraged loans and deals to buy the Hawthorne estate, his final trophy. She had played the role of the surprised and delighted wife. She had watched him sign what he believed were mortgage documents and purchase agreements, all expertly orchestrated by the discreet Mr. Durrance, who had ensured Richard's funds were channeled to a holding company that then sold the house to her. In reality, Richard had been paying a private loan to a trust Arthur had established, a trust Letitia now controlled. He hadn't been building equity. He had been paying rent. The sheer, brilliant audacity of Arthur's plan was breathtaking. He had given Richard the illusion of ownership, knowing his ego would never allow him to examine the details too closely. Letitia wiped her tears, and a new resolve hardened her features. The time for quiet acceptance was over. Arthur had given her a fortress, and tonight, Richard had laid siege to it. She picked up her phone and found the number for Samuel Durrance, the lawyer she had held on to all those years. It was past midnight, but the card he had given her read, "Call any time, day or night." The phone rang twice before a calm, elderly voice answered. "Durrance, Mr. Durrance," Letitia said, her voice slightly shaky but clear. "It's Letitia Solano, Letitia Vance." There was a pause on the other end, and then a gentle understanding. "Mrs. Solano, I must confess, I wondered if I would ever receive this call. Is everything all right?" "No," Letitia said, looking at the deed on her desk. "No, it is not, but it is about to be." She took a deep breath. "Mr. Hawthorne mentioned a storm. I believe the first rains have begun." "I see," Durrance replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "Your instructions in that event were very clear. The first step is to secure you independent counsel, someone of our choosing, not your husband's. She is the best. Her name is Evelyn Durrance. I will have her contact you first thing in the morning. Do nothing until you speak with her." "And the second step?" Letitia asked. "The second step," Durrance said, with a hint of satisfaction in his voice, "is to let the storm break." When Letitia finally went to bed, Richard was passed out, smelling of expensive scotch and self-satisfaction. He hadn't even noticed her absence. She lay beside him in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, the legal document a ghost brand in her mind. She was no longer Letitia Solano, the timid wife. She was Letitia Vance, the rightful owner of the Hawthorne estate, and the man sleeping next to her was nothing more than a tenant. An eviction notice was long overdue. Part 3. The eviction and the final revelation. The morning after the gala, the atmosphere at the Hawthorne estate was thick with unspoken tension. Richard nursed a hangover with black coffee and a terrible temper, grumbling about the valet service's poor performance and the lukewarm applause for his speech. He made no mention of the nanny comment, treating it as if it had never happened, his standard procedure for any transgression. Acknowledging it would be admitting fault. Letitia, however, was a different woman. The deference was gone, replaced by a quiet, unsettling calm. She served the children breakfast, her movements precise and deliberate. When Richard snapped at her to have his suit for the day pressed, she simply replied, "The staff can handle that," without looking up from buttering Leo's toast. Richard paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He wasn't accustomed to this tone. It wasn't defiant. It was dismissive. "What is wrong with you this morning?" he grumbled. "Just busy, Richard," she said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were clear and steady, and for the first time, he seemed to see a stranger looking back at him. He felt momentarily unnerved, but quickly attributed it to post-party fatigue. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Letitia's phone buzzed. A blocked number. She excused herself and took the call in her office, locking the door behind her. "Is this Letitia Solano?" The voice was female, crisp, and professional. "Yes, it is. My name is Evelyn Durrance. I'm an attorney. Samuel Durrance asked me to reach out. He suggested you might be in need of legal counsel." Letitia felt a wave of relief. "Yes, thank you for calling. Mr. Durrance has already forwarded me the relevant documents regarding the Hawthorne Trust and the deed to your property. I've reviewed them. It is, if I may say so, one of the most brilliantly executed estate plans I've ever seen. You are in an exceptionally strong position, Mrs. Solano. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" Letitia looked out the window at the rolling lawns of the estate. "I want him out," she said, the words tasting like freedom. "I want a divorce. I want to protect my children and secure my future, a future that does not involve him." "Very well," Evelyn replied. "Then we proceed with a leverage strategy. We don't show our cards until the perfect moment. Does your husband have any pressing financial business right now? Any venture that makes him particularly vulnerable?" Letitia's mind immediately went to the Marcus Thorne deal, the billionaire from the party. Richard had been obsessed with it for months. It was a massive international real estate development project that required a huge amount of upfront capital. Richard's firm was over-leveraged, and he was personally guaranteeing a significant portion of the loan. "He's trying to close the deal," Letitia explained. "He needs to secure a bridge loan of over $50 million. He's been boasting that the only reason the bank is considering it is because he's using the house as collateral. He calls it his rock-solid asset." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. "Oh, that is perfect. Absolutely perfect. He's trying to borrow against an asset he doesn't own. That is bank fraud, Mrs. Solano." The word hit Letitia hard. Fraud? This was more serious than she had imagined. "What do we do?" she asked. "We do nothing. We wait for him to make his move. The bank will conduct its own title search as part of its due diligence. When they do, the name they find will not be Richard Rivers. Let the bank discover the truth for us. In the meantime, live your life. Do not engage with him. Do not argue. Be polite. Be distant. And let him unravel on his own." For the next 2 weeks, Letitia followed Evelyn's advice. She existed in the house like a ghost, a polite stranger who shared a roof with Richard. The change was palpable. She stopped managing his social calendar. She stopped reminding him of his appointments. She focused solely on the children, taking them on long walks through the estate's woods, telling them stories about the trees and the land, stories Arthur had once told her. Richard predictably grew increasingly agitated. His world, which had always revolved around his needs, was suddenly unbalanced. "Why didn't you remind me about my dinner with the board?" he would snap. "That's your calendar, Richard," she would calmly reply. "The house is a mess. Why haven't you spoken to the staff?" "They are your employees as much as mine." His frustration culminated one evening when he came home in a state of high anxiety. "The Marcus Thorne deal is stalling. The bank is dragging its feet on the loan," he vented, pacing the library. "They're asking for endless paperwork, appraisals, inspections, title searches. It's exasperating. It's the Hawthorne estate, for God's sake. It's the most valuable thing there is." Letitia felt a chill. It was happening. "I'm sure it will all work out," she said, her voice a placid lake beneath which nothing could be seen. His anger then focused on her. "You know this is partly your fault. My head isn't in the game. This coldness of yours, it's a distraction. What do you want, Letitia? A new car? More jewelry? Just name your price so we can get back to normal." It was the most honest thing he had ever said. He truly believed her affection, and her very self could be bought. "There is no price, Richard," she said softly. "There is no going back to normal." His frustration boiled over in a visit from his mother, Beatrice Rivers, a woman made of iron and judgment. Beatrice never approved of Letitia, seeing her as a commoner who had trapped her brilliant son. She arrived unannounced, her presence sucking the warmth from the room. Beatrice cornered Letitia in the morning room, her eyes like granite fragments. "I don't know what games you're playing, young lady," she began, dispensing with pleasantries. "But Richard is under immense pressure. A man in his position needs a supportive wife, not a spoiled child giving him the silent treatment. Whatever it is, you need to end it. You owe him everything. Never forget that." The Letitia of a month ago would have withered under this assault. The new Letitia simply sipped her tea. "Thank you for your concern, Beatrice," she said, setting down her cup with a delicate clink. "But my marriage is a matter for my husband and I to discuss." "Your marriage?" Beatrice scoffed. "You have a lifestyle, dear. A very, very expensive lifestyle paid for by my son's sweat and genius. Don't mistake yourself and start thinking you have a say in how he runs his life." Letitia stood up, her height matching the older woman's. "I think you'll find," she said, her voice low and clear, "that I have a say in a great many things." She looked around the opulent room at the invaluable antiques and the silk wallpaper. "Especially when it comes to this house." Beatrice was struck speechless. An unknown, exasperating state for her. The breaking point came a week later. Richard burst into the house, his face a mask of triumphant relief. "It's done," he announced, throwing his briefcase onto a chair. "The bank is finally ready to move forward. They've scheduled the final appraisal and signing for tomorrow. They're sending their senior VP along with Marcus Thorne's own financial advisor just to make it official. They want to see the property one last time before releasing the funds." He grabbed Letitia by the shoulders, his eyes manic with energy. "This is it, Letitia. This deal will catapult us into the stratosphere. Tomorrow, you will play the part of the happy, supportive wife. You will smile. You will be charming. And you will not say a single word out of turn. Is that clear?" Letitia looked him in the eye and saw no love, no partnership, only a desperate man using her as a prop one last time. "Perfectly clear," she said. That night, she called Evelyn Durrance. "It's tomorrow," Letitia said. "Bring the bankers and the investors here." "Excellent," Evelyn replied, her voice loaded with energy. "The title search would have been completed this afternoon. The bank knows. Tomorrow, they are coming not to sign a deal, but to witness a confrontation. They want to see who they are really dealing with. So, we will give them one. What do I do tomorrow? At the appointed hour, you will arrive at the house. You will be let in. And then, Mrs. Solano, we let the storm break. The next day dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn morning that stood in cruel discord with the tempest brewing inside the Hawthorne estate. Richard was a whirlwind of nervous energy, barking orders at the staff and changing his tie 3 times. He wanted the house to look like a fortress of wealth and stability, a physical manifestation of his own success. Letitia, make sure there are fresh flowers in the Great Hall, he ordered. And for God's sake, wear that diamond necklace I bought you. Look the part. Letitia moved through the morning in a state of surreal calm. She dressed not in the flashy jewels Richard demanded, but in a simple, elegant cashmere dress in a deep forest green. It was a color Arthur had always said brought out the intelligence in her eyes. She felt armored in it. At 2:00, 2 black sedans crunched on the gravel driveway. Richard rushed out to meet them, his face stretched into a pained smile. Out stepped Marcus Thorne's advisor, an elegantly dressed woman named Mrs. Albright, and 2 grim-faced senior bankers, a Mr. Henderson and a Mr. Cole. Richard ushered them inside, his voice a resonant symphony of false bonhomie. "Welcome, welcome, welcome to my home," he declared, sweeping his arm to encompass the majestic grand hall. As you can see, a solid rock foundation. Letitia watched from the top of the stairs. Henderson and Cole exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. "An impressive property, Mr. Rivers," Mrs. Albright said, her tone neutral. "Truly magnificent." "Please call me Richard," he insisted. "Allow me to give you the grand tour before we sit down to sign the final documents. Every inch of this place tells a story." As Richard began his pompous tour, pointing out paintings he couldn't name and architectural features he didn't understand, Letitia descended the staircase. Her steps were silent, but her presence was immediately felt. The bankers and Mrs. Albright turned to her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Richard, annoyed by the interruption, shot her a look of pure fury. He tried to mask it with a laugh. "Ah, here is my wife, Letitia, always making sure things run smoothly," he declared. He turned to her, his voice a low, menacing whisper meant only for her. "Go see to the refreshments." Letitia ignored him. She walked directly to the group and extended her hand to Mrs. Albright. "It is a pleasure to see you again, Mrs. Albright. Mr. Henderson, Mr. Cole. I am Letitia Solano. Thank you for coming." The men shook her hand, their grips firm and respectful. The power dynamic in the room had subtly shifted. "Actually, Richard," Letitia said, her voice clear and strong, ringing through the cavernous hall. "Before you continue the tour of my house, I believe there is one more guest arriving." As if on cue, the heavy oak door swung open. A woman stood there, serene and confident, holding a leather brief. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of absolute authority. "Evelyn Durrance," she announced, walking in. "I am here as counsel for the owner of this property." Richard stared, his face a comical mask of confusion. "Owner? I am the owner. Who the hell are you?" "I am Ms. Durrance," Evelyn said, walking calmly to stand beside Letitia. "And I am here on behalf of my client, Letitia Vance." The name, her maiden name, hung in the air. Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Vance? What is this? Some kind of joke, Letitia? What did you do?" "What I should have done years ago, Richard," Letitia said, her gaze unyielding. "I decided to tell the truth." "Mr. Henderson," the lead banker cleared his throat. "Mr. Rivers, we ran the title search on the Hawthorne estate yesterday, as a final part of our due diligence for the $50 million loan you requested, which you intended to secure with this property as collateral. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The property is not in your name. It has been for the last 6 years, in the exclusive name of Letitia Maria Vance. It is free of any mortgage. Richard's face went white. The blood drained so fast he seemed to shrink before their eyes. That is impossible. It's an administrative error, a mistake, he stammered, turning to Letitia. What have you done? Did you forge something? This is insane. Evelyn Durrance stepped forward and opened her brief. She pulled out a single parchment document. It was a certified copy of the deed. There is no mistake, Mr. Rivers, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his panic. My client, Letitia Vance, is the legal and sole owner of the Hawthorne estate. The funds you used to purchase the property 6 years ago were directed to a trust she controls, as per the explicit instructions of the previous owner's estate, Mr. Arthur Hawthorne. For the past 6 years, you have not been paying a mortgage. You have been paying the rent. She laid the deed on a nearby mahogany table. The black ink of Letitia's name seemed to scream from the page. Richard stared at it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked from the deed to Letitia, his eyes wild with disbelief and a horrible, mounting comprehension. The silence, the distance, the strange calm, it all snapped into place. This was a coup. You, he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Mrs. Albright, Marcus Thorne's advisor, spoke, her voice stripped of any warmth. Mr. Rivers, attempting to secure a $50 million loan against an asset you do not own constitutes bank fraud. Marcus Thorne built his reputation on integrity and sound business. We will, of course, withdraw from the development project immediately. Our relationship is terminated. Mr. Henderson nodded. As is your line of credit with our institution. We will require repayment of all outstanding loans. I expect our legal team to be in touch with you by the end of the day. The entire edifice of Richard's life, his career, his reputation, his self-worth, crumbled into dust in the span of 30 seconds. He had lost the deal, lost his bank, and faced financial ruin and potential criminal charges. He finally directed all his venomous rage at Letitia. You traitor, he snarled, taking a step toward her. After everything I gave you, I pulled you out of nothing. You gave me nothing, Letitia replied, her voice ringing with a power no one in that room had heard from her before. Everything I have, I earned. This house was a gift, a kindness from a man who saw my worth. Where you only saw an accessory. You didn't pull me out of nothing, Richard. You tried to turn me into nothing. You stood in this very hall 2 weeks ago and called me just the nanny in front of your friends. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Well, the nanny owns the house. The nanny owns the land your feet are standing on, and the nanny is telling you your tenancy is over. The bankers and Mrs. Albright, having witnessed the full detonation, quietly excused themselves. This was a family matter now, and their business was concluded. Evelyn Durrance remained as a silent, powerful guard by Letitia's side. Richard stared at her, his face a twisted wreck of fury and humiliation. The king was deposed. The castle was not his. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was just a man standing in his ex-wife's hallway, about to be homeless. Part 4. The reclaimed home and the new dawn. The moment the heavy oak door closed behind the bankers, the last vestiges of Richard's composure shattered, his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "You will not get away with this!" he roared, his voice echoing unnaturally in the suddenly silent hall. He lunged, not at Letitia, but at the mahogany table, grabbing the copy of the deed and ripping it in two. "This means nothing! This house is mine! I paid for it!" Evelyn Durrance did not flinch. "Tearing up a copy changes nothing, Mr. Rivers," she said, her voice as sharp and cold as ice. "The original is in a bank vault. And as for what you paid, my client is prepared to consider that rent for the 6 years you enjoyed living on her property. A property, I might add, you have allowed to fall into some disrepair, which we will factor into our divorce settlement." "Divorce!" He spat the word like venom. "You think I'm going to walk away from my life, from my children?" "They are my children, Richard," Letitia said, her voice steady, cutting through his tirade. "And they will stay here, in their home, with me. You will not take my children," she shouted. Evelyn Durant stepped forward, her presence towering. "I advise you to think very carefully about your next words, Mr. Rivers. My client is being exceptionally generous. She could press charges for bank fraud. She could sue you for the emotional distress and public humiliation you have subjected her to for years. She could expose your precarious financial dealings, and we have a very clear picture of them, to every major media outlet in the country. Your reputation would be so toxic, you couldn't get a loan for a cup of coffee." She let the threats hang in the air. "Or," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "you could accept the terms of the separation agreement we have drafted. You walk away with your personal belongings and a silence order, promising never to contest custody of the children or disparage their mother. In exchange, she will not press charges and will not pursue you for the millions you technically owe her. You will be free to go and try to salvage what is left of your pathetic career. The choice is yours. A quiet, humiliating exit or total annihilation." Richard stared at her, then at Letitia. He saw no weakness, no hesitation. He saw 2 women who had him completely cornered. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the hollow, bitter certainty of defeat. He was a predator who had been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. He let the torn pieces of the deed flutter from his fingers to the floor. Without another word, he turned and stomped up the grand staircase. The sounds of slamming doors and forcefully pulled open drawers echoed through the house. For the next few hours, Richard packed. Letitia and Evelyn Durant sat in the library drinking tea while he dismantled his life. He took his expensive suits, his flashy watches, his self-congratulatory awards. When he came down the stairs with 2 suitcases and a garment bag, he looked like a diminished man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, deep-seated resentment. He paused at the door and looked at Letitia one last time. "I hope you'll be happy," he sneered, "alone in this big, empty house." "It's not empty, Richard," Letitia said softly, thinking of Lila and Leo upstairs, safe and oblivious. "It was only empty when you were here." He walked out, the closing of the door final and absolute. The silence he left behind was not empty. It was peaceful. In the days that followed, Letitia began to reclaim the house. She had the locks changed. She hired her own staff, people who looked at her with respect, not pity. She began packing Richard's remaining belongings, the ugly modern art he preferred, his oversized leather furniture, into boxes for storage. She walked the rooms and, for the first time, felt the comforting embrace of home. She sat down with Lila and Leo and explained to them, in simple, age-appropriate terms, that their father would be living elsewhere for a while, but that he loved them, and that this would always be their home. Lila, who at 10 was more perceptive than Letitia, simply hugged her mother. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. "He was always so loud." One afternoon, while clearing out the hobby room to turn it into a proper studio for herself, she found the original manila folder. Tucked deep inside was another smaller envelope she had never seen before. It was also in Arthur's handwriting, marked, "For when the storm has passed." She opened it. "My dearest Letitia, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found your voice. It means you unleashed the strength I always knew you possessed. I am proud of you. The house was never a weapon. It was a key to a door behind which your true life was waiting for you. Do not live in my house, dear. Make it yours. Fill it with laughter, with art you love, with children and friends. Let it be a sanctuary, not a fortress. The world is full of noisy men, but you have proven that the quietest voices often have the most important things to say. Your future is an unwritten book. Go and fill the pages. Yours, Arthur. Tears welled up in Letitia's eyes as she read the letter. She looked out the window at the old oak tree on the lawn that Arthur had loved so much. The gilded cage was gone. The bars had melted away. She stood in her own home, the owner of her own destiny. She was not Richard Rivers' wife, and she certainly wasn't just the nanny. She was Letitia Vance, and she was finally whole, gloriously free. In the end, the grand mansion was not the prize. The true victory was Letitia's recovery of herself. She proved that true power is not about wealth or status, but the quiet strength found within us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Richard Rivers built his world on a foundation of arrogance and illusion, and it only took one piece of paper and one moment of courage to bring it all down. Letitia didn't just evict a cheating husband. She evicted the fear and doubt he had instilled in her for a decade. She is a reminder that your worth is never determined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself. If this story of resilience and empowerment resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas and stories of justice. What did you think of Letitia's final move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.